Hello again. About 6 years ago, I uploaded a video series on YouTube called The Telepathic Pyramid. It was very popular, but I took it down because I thought that it may not be the right time to share. I'm always thinking to myself, is it the right time to share videos? For there are variables which many people have not yet been informed about. This project is very special to me, and I'd like the chances of its success as great as possible. So I've recently been focusing on the films, and they're quite mathematically heavy in the content. There's a lot of mathematics in them, and it requires a very focused mind to actually absorb this and to be able to maintain interest because of its mentally challenging aspect. Requires a lot of brain power, in other words. So what I'm thinking of is making more films that have more of the philosophy in them and are not as mathematically heavy. But in saying this, the mathematics must be presented. So I will continue to make films to do this. But this film explains my past attempts to show how to build and construct the pyramid that I've been working on for many years. The film is 6 years old and is slightly out of date, meaning I had a lot of information back then, but I didn't actually have the mathematics which allows the machines to work. So the machine was more or less dimensionless. There were a few mathematical things that I knew, but that was intuitively based. It just so happens that I was correct, because later on the mathematics backs this up, which will be shown in the future videos. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence to suggest that the machines are valid, and I will present it bit by bit as time goes by. It is my dream to create these machines. However, the ingredients to do so are the right group of people, the finances, and the right location. This all has to come together. It's not wise or safe for me to construct the machines by myself. So at the moment, I'm doing whatever I can to draw the right interest in and to hopefully, for once and for all, convince people that there is actually legitimacy to what I've been doing all this time. And to convince people to step on board so that for once and for all, the machine can actually be constructed and put into the public domain for all to access and be able to use safely. This is a very tricky and complex thing, though, in order to try and execute. And there are many variables which I constantly think of. But in saying this, I hope you enjoy the film. And yes, once again, just remember, the information is not complete, but it is a very visual presentation, and that is why I've been inspired to upload it again. It allows people to actually visualize what's going on within the pyramid so that it is more exciting to absorb this information and hopefully will inspire people. I hope you enjoy. This is where I will explain the practical side of how the principles allow the machine to work, and as well as that, the how to actually build it on a rough sort of scale. How to build the telepathic Arcturian pyramid. And the first subject which I'll be talking about is the ether, because the ether is incredibly misunderstood, and it's the only thing that allows the pyramid to work. without the ether, the pyramid does not do anything. It needs the ether. Pyramids work off ether, nothing. They don't work off electromagnetism. They produce electromagnetism as a side effect, but they don't. Electromagnetism does. It's not the principle. Electromagnetism is a side effect of etheric transduction. It's back to front. It's the other way round. So basically, the properties of the ether. I don't know where to really begin. Ether is so vast. It's like basically, to start with, we have atoms in this dimension which have protons, neutrons, electrons, and there's other things which people are starting to figure out on a smaller scale, but it goes all the way down. So if you've got an atom, let's say, it's my atom, it looks big on the page, but the way I understand the ether is that it is the small particles between the atoms. It's like a carrier. It's everything, though. I can't sort of really explain it on a simple level. I'm having trouble doing it. But basically, it's the medium. The ether is what this dimension is built off of. It comes first. So the ether is first, atoms is second. In other words, the first source, the source of everything comes from the ether, the ethers. And there are heaps of ethers. They come in, it's like, the ether is like particles or dust, or it's not particles or dust, but it's particles. They're not particles. They're subatomic. If this is the gauge of atoms, it's below that. It's smaller than the size of atoms. But that's only the beginning. It goes all the way down. So if that particle was blown up, it would go down. And if it was blown up again, I'm not sure how to do this, it would go down again. It would collapse and collapse. So it would go all the way down, and it keeps going. And then you get to higher grade, or really subtle ethers, so to speak, higher frequency ethers. So basically, the ether is what this dimension is built off of. It allows all waves to be transmitted through the ether. It's the carrier for all waves, all types of waves. Waves not even discovered, like longitudinal waves, transverse waves, Rayleigh waves, all different types of waves. We're only familiar with a few types of waves, like electromagnetic waves and the waves I just mentioned, but you can do anything with the ether. It's like plasticine. It's like Play-Doh. It's like, imagine it as like weightless water that can be completely elastic, but at the same time it can be rigid depending on how you treat it. And certain types of ethers, I'm just going to write it down. Certain ethers are conscious and semi-conscious. They can respond to certain things in different ways. And so the ether it can retain memory. So you can actually program certain ethers, really small, high-grade ethers, to retain memory. I'm not going to bother with point forms, it's retarded. Yeah, you can. It's like it's like the glue of the universe. Say if the third dimension wouldn't exist as we perceive it, which it doesn't exist anyway. It's not actually real as people think things are real, but it wouldn't exist without the ethers. The ethers are the connection between what we perceive as here, which is the third dimension, or whatever, 3 dimensions, with the time vector spliced onto it, and there, which is the mind, the universal mind, or minds that go on to, it keeps going, it never ends, it cascades infinitely to nothingness. And then once you think you've gotten down to the very first particle size, then you find out that it's equivalent to the size of a planet in the eyes of the mind, the mastermind, or whatever. But basically, I mean, some people think that it's here. I used to think it's the 3rd dimension, and ether was the 4th dimension, but it's not. Ether's like the bit here in between the two. So basically, it's the carrier or the communicator. It can exist in all 4 states, being solid, solid. What have we got? I've forgotten the symbols. I'm supposed to know these. Oh, I've messed it up. I think that might be right. Solid, solid. Solid, liquid, gas, plasma, or earth, water, air, fire. It actually can exist in all of these states, and it can be stable in all states. Even the plasma state, the ether can exist quite comfortably. And ancient alchemical texts refer to this mercury substance, which is actually a low grade of ether. It's an ether which can exist in between the water and air state, which is here, and air and fire for sulfur. So it's basically, it's super light. It will like just float. If need be, it will float. But basically, there are different grades of ethers. There's ethers which will pass through a solid object quite easily, and there's ethers which will generally not. They might be repelled by certain objects. They mightn't like it. They're sort of picky and funny. It's like living. It's like conscious dust, in a way. It's very hard to explain on a technical level, actually. You can store it, which is what the pyramid does. You can store it and trap it into a space, and then you can attract it. You can repel it. You can transmit wave. You can build its pressure up, and you can transmit waves through that pressure, standing waves. So it's like to a potter, or whatever they're called. It's like the clay. You can do anything with it if you know how to manipulate it. It's sort of everything and nothing at the same time. It can take on any form, but it's formless at the same time. So basically, where the pyramid comes in is the fact that it manipulates the ether, and it does that in the next segment, which is if I've got my facts correct, what have we got? In the next segment of how geometry manipulates the ether, so I'll just move on to that anyway. I'm briefly going to talk about the overview of the pyramid, as in its systems broken down. its main systems and what they do. So the pyramid really only uses two main systems. The first one is the accumulation of energy, pretty much, which is which is all to do with the Alpha Omega. It's what the Alpha Omega does is it's like a vortex generator. It accumulates the energy, it sucks it in, and that whole system, it needs other supporting components, but that whole system basically is to attract and build up energy, and I'll explain how it does that. I just can't do it all at once right now. So energy comes from that system. So you've got energy, accumulation, and I can't spell worth a damn. The second one is the oscillator, which is the quartz is responsible for the quartz oscillator. Basically, what that does is that system is what this system does is it oscillates the wave inside the pyramid. This builds up the energy and the pressure, and the oscillator puts a standing longitudinal wave through that pressure. And that's how the pyramid transmits. It has to build potential, and then it has to put waves through that potential. Otherwise, it's not transmitting into anything. It's transmitting into itself. It's an ingenious kind of a weird system that's very strange in the thinking, because it's weird. It's like creating something on its own accord and then transmitting into it to get the effect. It's really cool. So it's sort of like, and that system actually follows the principles, like on an oscillatory level, of an AM radio, pretty much. You have this system does this one, which you have your carrier wave, which is set at a base frequency, which is just oscillating at the same rate all the time. It's just an oscillation to stabilize the thing. And then you have your information wave, which comes from the human aura, which contains the subtle information that is decrypted emotions. In other words, emotions are wavelengths, which they are, but in a sort of slightly different way. Not electromagnetic wavelengths, they're pressure wavelengths. The whole system is pressure, has nothing to do with electromagnetism, but electromagnetism is produced. But the whole system is all to do with pressure waves, longitudinal waves, very much like sound waves, but completely superior. So, just repeating, first principle of how the device works is it accumulates energy, so it has potential to work with. Second system is the oscillator, which puts a standing wave through the built-up pressure from the energy accumulation. It has a base frequency as a carrier, and an information frequency, which is all over the place, and it's here and there. It's multiple wavelengths. It all gets carried away. Emotional wavelengths are really weird and interesting, and that's pretty much how it works. It's like an AM radio. It's really so similar, but it has the accumulated energy and everything else. But the way the circuit oscillates, one part of it is the AM radio system fused with this. So that's sort of that's basically how it works. The principles, the two subsystems. Okay. So basically, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the layers of the pyramid. It has layers. pen's hacked into the paper. It has layers, and it's easiest to explain the layers from in concentric spheres. So it's a bit out of calibration, and I'll do that with this, and that is to state. I'll use the compass. I hope it can be seen. That is to state that there are layers to the pyramid, and they always correspond in a certain fashion. And the outer layer is the nothingness. Goodness me, this is harder than I thought. The nothingness is the vacuum. The vacuum is the potential for all. Like, I'm talking about the physical, the actual vacuum, the universal, no pressure, no resistance, nothing. Well, I mean, you can't have a pure vacuum, but practically it is in a lot of ways. In the pyramid, the vacuum, what's left over in the vacuum does contain some inert gases, but that's for a reason which I'll explain later. So you have the vacuum, the nothingness, the all potential. The second layer is the geometry, which is the pyramid shape, and that basically, that's the second layer. That's the bit where it all starts. The pyramid dictates how it's going to manipulate the ethers. It's the beginning, in a way. The next layer, I don't think this is going to work properly, but who cares? The next layer is the reflectors. And that base, I don't even know what that spells, but it's supposed to spell reflectors. And that's basically after the pyramid shape, you have reflectors keeping the energy in. The next sphere is, I'm getting my memory back. I haven't thought about this stuff for a while, but I had it all written down at one, lost in the files. The next stage is the I believe it's the Alpha Omega symbol, which is actually, you see, it's the vacuum, which is just stripping it back to nothing. Geometry, which is telling the ethers what to do and what space-time ratio to use, depending on its angle, etc. And its metal composition. The reflectors just keep the energy in. I mean, and this is concentric to how the pyramid's built. The next is the Alpha Omega, which is the energy accumulator. It spins the energy and builds up more energy. So that's your reactor is the Alpha Omega, pretty much. It's it pumps in energy to the system. The next layer is the void, which is the magnetic void, which encourages the ethers to pop through by creating a weak pressure zone within the weak pressure zone. The void and the pyramid are similar in a sense that the geometry of the pyramid creates a void in the middle, and the magnetic void further influences that to tell the ethers where to pop through by creating a neutral pressure zone within, between the two magnets, which have opposing fields towards each other. And the next, and I'm not sure if this is the last layer, it's not. The next layer is the crystal transducer, which is basically the part which transduces to the very last part, which is the hole that goes to the ether. That's where it ends. It goes through here, and this is as far as you can go. This is where it pops out into it in the other dimension, which is just a different state or form of ether. All of this supports that, and all of that is this. So it starts where it ends, and it ends where it starts, if that makes sense. And all of this represents how the atom works as well, in a way, in some kind of way, but not exactly. But so you have the vacuum, which is just stripping back to nothing, so there's no resistance, etc. The geometry to give a signature to the initial reaction. The reflectors just to keep the energy in, that's optional in a way, but not for the pyramid, you need them. But the alpha omega, which is the drive, the reactor, the energy accumulator, the void, which is set up, which you set up to influence the ether in a certain spot and pretty much influence, it's like extracting it, which is also connected with the geometric principle. The crystal, which is the transducer for the nothing or the whole or the 0 point within. If that makes any sense. So that's basically the concentric layers of the device. So in this section we're going to talk about the elements which the pyramid uses to manipulate the ethers and why. I've always been obsessed with the elements. I think they're special. I think every element's special. To me, they're more like entities that have emotions, certain signatures, certain colors. That's just the way I see them. And I like the periodic table because the way it's mapped out is you can understand how similar they are on a really rough level. They're not always the same. By where they're positioned, yeah, it's fascinating stuff. But you see, there are a few spots on the periodic table which are very special, and there's only 3 spots on the periodic table minus 1 area that there's only 3 sections that the pyramid occupies, and they're equally as important as each other. It's almost like a unison going on. But I'll start with the inert gases. The inert gases fascinate me. I've always been fascinated by them. They're so interesting and weird. And but basically, when you have a vacuum in the pyramid, it takes away the resistance. But what's left has to be something, because there's no such thing as it, especially on the way we achieve vacuums, is there's always something left over. But basically, what's left over is what you want left over in the pyramid are the inert gases. And the pyramid primarily focuses on the classic inert gases of first comes argon, second neon, third krypton, fourth xenon, in different percentages, but the highest percentage is argon, then neon, krypton, then xenon. And I have all the percentages which I'll go through at a later date, or I'll pop them up on the screen. So you need them in the vacuum. The way it works is that they're the marking point between the octaves of the elements. You understand elements above and similar to ones below, and basically if the periodic table is like a music scale that has octaves, the octaves start and end at the inert gases, and that's why you need them in the pyramid. These ones work best, and argon and neon are the ones which can house the most signatures. So it's just the way it is. I don't understand why it is. I'd have to think about it for ages, but yeah, it's just argon is the most common, neon, and then just traces of, not traces, like, I don't know, 12% of krypton, maybe 4% of xenon. I've got it written down as a graph, but basically the second area I want to show, which I'm fond of, is semiconductors. Silicon and germanium especially. The silicon and germanium semiconductors are what allows all the magic to happen in the pyramid, because they're sort of they're responsible for the germanium. I'll start with the silicon. The silicon is like the master element for transduction, or it's the most sought after, desired element to use in the crystal, in the quartz crystal, well, because that's what quartz is, silicon and oxygen, and it's like a very, very stable crystal, and it's also a wonder material to use as to let the ether pass through. Quartz. So the primary crystals in the pyramid are based off silicon. They're just the quartz crystals because they're very, very stable. The second is germanium, which is like, I see like silicon as masculine, I see germanium as feminine. Germanium fascinates me. I think it's the most fascinating of all the semiconductor elements. It's highly sensitive. You can use it for many things, but the germanium is used in the box, and the reason for that is because it's very sensitive, and it also is more sensitive to it's sensitive to a broad range of spectrum. It absorbs a broad range of etheric spectrums and light spectrums, and then you can convert that into you can convert it into voltage, but you can also convert it into just wire. You can turn that energy and make it, you can influence it through wire using germanium as a cell, like a solar cell, but instead of silicon, you use germanium, which is the box. So those are the semiconductors. That's section 2. Section 3 are the elements here, which primarily, again, it's twins. It's the copper and the silver. The copper being the masculine, the silver being the feminine. So you have here your two masculine, feminine here, and you have your masculine and feminine here. The copper is responsible for manipulating all of the energy in the pyramid. Most of everything to do with energy manipulation in the pyramid, in like directing it and attracting it, is copper based. Copper, silver, gold, platinum and mercury are the most superior elements, energetically speaking, and electrically they reflect that as well. Silver being the highest conductor. I mean, they're not all, there's no super superior element. They all have strengths and weaknesses, but copper, for what it is very cheaply available to us. It's just as superior as silver and gold, but in other ways. So yeah, you use copper for everything, like just pure copper. It doesn't really matter too much, I don't think. But and it's always clean and shiny. It's not dirty because it oxidizes quickly. you make it clean. But the copper is it's your number one agent for manipulating energy. The second is silver, and that's used to reflect energy. So if copper's to draw energy in and manipulate it and spin it around, do whatever, silver is actually what pushes it back. And that's because silver is so highly conductive, and also because it offers a differential between copper. If you had a copper pyramid and a copper reflector, the energy would get confused. You need, to manipulate it properly, you need a differential in between. So that's those the different elements. They're similar but not the same, and you need that. The energy needs to know what to do. It can get confused, or it doesn't get confused, but it will deadlock unless it has poles or potential through shapes and different compositions of stuff. It's the same laws appear in physics, and it's all through physics, how the battery works, etc. Gold's not used in the pyramid at all. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't actually ever come up for some reason, strangely enough. I'm not sure why, but you probably could use it, but there's no point. You use platinum, but that's just for the electrodes for the mercury. So we'll skip gold, and mercury is one of the most special elements in the pyramid because it allows for easy creation of the effect which is a component in the pyramid which allows for transduction between the ethers. It allows transduction between pressure waves and electromagnetic waves. It'll turn pressure waves into electromagnetic waves, the ways this component set up called the file, which is explained later on. So basically, and there's also, which is not really a part of the equation because you can use anything, but we also use sodium and chlorine combined, here it is, as a crystal salt, because it's a soft piezoelectric crystal. You can use multiple different types of crystals, but salts, I've used salt and it works just fine. You can use other kinds of crystals, which would be superior, but salts seems to be the one. It just works, and I stuck with it. I couldn't be bothered researching other crystals. It wasn't important. It's important getting the thing to work. So basically, the main focus is the inert gases. These two, twins, masculine, feminine, semiconductors, the two main metals, which is copper and silver, and then you have the mercury, which combined with the salt crystal creates a really interesting effect that allows for the main transducer in the pyramid between pressure and electromagnetic waves. So that's pretty much what the pyramid is made out of, just those materials, but in different forms. Also silicon and oxygen is connected with silicon as well as to make up quartz. The next section I'm going to talk about is the vacuum. Vacuum. When I was young, when I was younger, I was always obsessed with everything to do with the pyramid before I was even interested in the pyramid. It's so weird. It's like I've been configured to make the pyramid. It's like my brain's been... It's like it's compatible with it. It's just weird. I've always been obsessed with the vacuum and creating vacuums in this atmosphere. Creating the nothing is exciting to me. It's like I see the vacuum as, I've got a symbol for it. I see it as like that for some reason. And it's like in there, all can happen. Anything can happen in that sucked in cube. It's like, yeah, it's just cool. Anyway, the vacuums, if in the future when people do start making this technology, they'll come to learn that they won't be able to do anything efficiently without creating the vacuum and taking away, because our atmosphere is resist is it's it has resistance. That's why an asteroid coming through the atmosphere will get hot, and it's because it's passing from the vacuum into density, which is the gas molecules in the atmosphere. And basically you need this, not this. The pyramid won't start ever, it won't even do much. It will a bit, but it won't start, it won't actually turn into a singularity unless you create the vacuum inside it. And the vacuum level is also important. Strangely enough, the pyramid needs a bit of gas in it, more than space. It actually needs pressure. And there's 3 levels of vacuum in the pyramid to get it working. The first one is about 1,000 microns. Whatever, I don't know. 1,000 microns, which I think is 99.9% vacuum, I think, or 99. I looked it up and I've forgotten since. It's all, but yeah, around 1,000 microns, and that's to do with the diameter. That's to do with something which I'll explain later on, to do with the gap. The second level required is around 200 microns, and the third level is 50 microns, but it can range between these two, the 250 depending. They're on different, like the tube, the mercury and salt tube has a different vacuum to the whole pyramid, which can fluctuate between 1,000 and 50. And that's to do with a spark gap, which you have to tune to start the thing up, which I'll talk about later. But so basically, yeah, you need to come to understand how important the vacuum is, and yeah, it's like, don't bother unless you've got the vacuum, and the catch to that is you need that as one, and this is what I've struggled so much with. It's not hard to achieve a vacuum with the pump, to 1,000 microns especially, even to 200 it's easy. Which is 200 is about 99.995, I think. I'm not sure. I've forgotten all that. But I know it's 200 and 1,000. The second, first of all you need the vacuum, but the second, the catch to it, which is where the pain comes in, is that you need a material to withstand the vacuum, and it needs to fulfill 2 requirements, which makes it, this is where the nightmare begins. And the first one is, yes, it must be strong enough to withstand the vacuum without, breaking and fracturing, blowing up in your face or imploding. And I've always terrified of my vacuum chambers blowing up in my face, because they're like bombs, especially the glass ones. They can blow up. I made one with a thin panel to test it on the bottom, and just to see what its threshold was, and the thing blew up like an explosive. It was scary. It was intense. But the second is, and this is the tricky part, the ether must be able to get through it. Well, ether's not a wave, but the ether must be able to get through it with ease. In other words, you need the vacuum to take away the resistance. The catch is there's a case in the way to keep the vacuum out within the center, and that's the case's density. So it's like cancelling it out in a way, but it's not quite exactly. So to counteract that, the material needs to be transparent, and the materials that I've used, being plastic, if this is plastic, what happens is, and I didn't know this in the beginning, the ether comes in, it wants to go in, and then it gets to the surface, and then it goes really slow. It suffocates. It can't get in. It's trying to get in, but it doesn't, so it can't perpetuate because the plastic slowed it way down. The plastic's great, but forget it when it comes to the ether. I mean, the energy gets through, but the pyramid's never going to start properly using plastic. I mean, it may, but I'd be so surprised if it did. It slows down the wave. The second is glass, standard glass, which again, it comes in, but the energy, it's slowed down a bit, but it's also fractured and sent everywhere because of the iron and crap and impurities in the glass. And so it's also, glass is a little bit, it's a bit weak to use. It can shatter. You need to have it quite thick. What is usable is high grade, ultraviolet grade fused silica, where the energy will come up to it, it'll slow down a bit, but it'll keep going fast enough, I think, to start the machine, to feed it enough energy without suffocating it. The optimum material is quartz itself on Z-axis. Now this is where you get really posh, and it would be obscene amounts of money to do this, because you'd have to grow your own synthetic crystal. They don't grow crystals that big as far as I'm aware, but you'd have to have a synthetic quartz crystal grown on its Z-axis, so the energy goes straight through that axis, because it's going to have the least amount of resistance, can have it ultraviolet grade, very pure, and then you've got yourself the vacuum and a transparent material which the energy can pass through. That's pure potential right there. If you've got those two, then you've got the pyramid shape that this is made out of. You've got a void of potential which you can do anything in. And I've always fantasized about having a crystal case. I haven't yet obtained one, but I've always been so excited as to what would happen if I had a crystal case. I'd be so much more inspired, because I look at the plastic ones and think, ugh, I just know that like it doesn't, I just know the plastic's not the way forward at all. So basically that's the transparency factor. That jacks the price up huge. I can build one of these plastic ones myself by hand for like $150. I can get the angles accurate. You want the same thing in quartz? You're looking at about 17 grand. Sorry, fused ultraviolet grade, which has less bubbles and impurities in it. Ultraviolet transparent fused silica, or quartz, is about 16,000. That's cheap as well. I think it's more actually, I've forgotten. And custom quartz, it would be just an obscene amount of money. If it was grown, synthetic quartz would cost a fortune. But if money wasn't an obstacle, that's the way to go. Synthetic quartz would be the perfect material to use. What else is there? That pretty much covers the vacuum. I mean, it doesn't fully, but the main thing to remember is it takes away resistance, it takes away other forces, it cleans it up, it like takes the mud out. If you see air is like a muddy swamp, the vacuum is a nice clear pond of distilled water, and you can move through it without resistance. Whereas air is just like the way the ether sees it, and to get full spin potential, it's like the comet going through the atmosphere, which it comes up against heaps of friction to slow it down and stop it from building up potential, pretty much. Next, I'm going to talk about the pyramid itself. And the question, why a pyramid? And it all starts, before it even gets to the pyramid. I hope this is visible. It starts with geometry. And what is geometry? Geometry is form. I don't even know if that's how you spell form. It's form. Because without form, what is there? There's nothing. There's nothing. It's either nothing or form. So you've got the vacuum and the ethers, or the vacuum is formless. So you've just got the ether and form. So it all starts with form. And form takes the simplest, so ether, then form, and the simplest forms that can possibly exist are the Platonic solids. The first one being the tetrahedron, the cube, etc., the octahedron. Form, that's the most basic form, and that's the forms of so many compounds and elements, and it shows up everywhere in nature and keeps showing up. And the ratios in between these forms keep showing up in nature as well. If you extract ratios from these forms, like the supposed to be, the pentagram, ratios in that, which is the phi, ratio, the all famous that's not the right ratio at all. Phi shows up in nature, which is an extraction from the simplest forms which exist, the Platonic solid. And that comes to the next layer, step, whatever. Choose one. The tetrahedron. Shapes have polarity. As soon as you have form, it has a pole to it. So you've got polarity. And if you look at it on the simplest level, start with the sphere. Which a sphere has, there's no such thing as a perfect shape in nature. It doesn't exist. But near perfection has an effect on the ethers. A sphere has like a sort of balanced equilibrium. It has polarity, like as in like positive and negative, or negatives and positives. It can be like inverted either way. But it's sort of balanced and sort of frozen. It's like, and this is where it gets into another thing, that it gets into the differentials, which I'll just put here. And that is that you need them for action. And basically that's the next step. As soon as that sphere turns into an ellipse, the poles change. Change, and they find equilibrium somewhere else. So the law is that the sharpest points is where the energy flows in, and the weakest, the most dull points is where the energy stabilizes. And that's just the way it works. That's universal, and that's through everything. So you've got the ether, and then you need form to manipulate it. Form does manipulate the ether, and you start off with the sphere, but that's balanced and equalized. So as soon as you give it a differential, make it like an ellipse or something, then that gains, all of a sudden it has polarity rather than sort of a a frozen, deadlocked, neutral nothingness. It has potential and polarity because it's imperfect. And that's why nature needs imperfection for the systems to work and for each system to have a signature. So I'll explain this in regards to the pyramid because the differentials come into the pyramid. But to start with, basically, why a pyramid? In the next question, and that is because the nature of space and time, and it's pretty much for multiple reasons, but you need three directions to map out a place in space. You need height, width, depth, x, y, z, etc. You need three to actually have a reference point in space. It's different for time, but you need them. You need at least three. What the pyramid does is it combines the three natural vectors which exist on the planet Earth together. And the way it does that is, I mean, you have the gravity vector which runs from up to down, and you have the poles vectors which run from south to north, and you have, is this the right way around? You have the ether drift, because of the way the planet is spinning. It should all go through each other. The way the planet is spinning, you have the ether drift which runs from west to east. So the pyramid also takes advantage of the three naturally existing vectors, which being gravity from up to down, the magnetic field flow, the natural one, from south to north, and the ether drift, because of the spin of the planet, from west to east. And it combines the three fields and fuses them at the top and in the center, which creates a corridor between here and here, but it creates a negative pressure zone here with these three vectors combined: gravity, magnetism, and the naturally flowing ethers. And you've got yourself, you know where the weakest zone is. It's 1/3 of the way up in the pyramid, because that's the harmonic center of that shape, of a pyramid shape. It's the very center of the center, let's say. That's why a pyramid shape, it's like the shape of shapes. It's a shape to manipulate potential, because it's compatible with space and time, and it's the simplest system to work with. Like a tetrahedron as a platonic solid, a pyramid is to ether physics, pretty much. And it's three-dimensional, which it has to be to have those three vectors in space. The next, basically, and this is one thing I want to explain. Most people have it in their heads that have researched the internet. They think there's only one angle of a pyramid. And that's just ridiculous, because the Giza pyramid, which is like based off phi, which I'm not saying is like it's a great pyramid and all, and phi is one of the most common ratios in space and time, and one of the most superior, but which is whatever it is, 51.83 I think degrees, measured like that. I have CAD, so I use that all the time. That's not the only pyramid angle that exists. I can tell you. I mean, I've had people email me so many times telling me that's the angle I need. They don't know what they're talking about, pretty much. Because they just don't know what they're talking about. That's one angle that exists. I mean, there's the octahedron, which, is one of the Platonic solids if you chop it up. It's got, I don't know what it is, 54 degrees and something, I think. It's close to the Pyramid of Giza, but it's not, because basically, to start with, there's different angles and why. Why is there different angles? It's because the angle matches up with the ratio, which is literally matching up with the space-time ratio. The angles piggyback off of space-time ratios, which are found in the fundamental forms that exist. And the fundamental space-time ratios are what is within the Platonic solids. The lines that make them up, and the lines between the lines, the diagonal lines, the lines between... I can't draw this. The invisible lines are where the ratios hide. And the pyramid is literally synchronizing with those space-time ratios, piggybacking off them, so that because those space-time ratios have a lot of potential. So if your pyramid angle matches up with one, it's going to be in the zone, in that special zone where all the action is happening. The fire one's really common because it's very powerful. It's in a super active zone. Fire might be the most active zone that exists with the pyramid, but my pyramid's not the fire pyramid, and there's reasons for that, and that's because some shapes aren't practical to work with. There's other constraints and restrictions that happen. So if you're looking at a steeper pyramid, you have to accommodate it, otherwise it's not going to, you might run into trouble with some of the parts if it's too steep or whatever, and some just aren't compatible all around. But I know of, like, there's that angle, 60 degrees pyramid angle, there's a 72 degree pyramid, which is the inverted version of the Giza pyramid. It's like the equilibrium point is the 60 degrees one, but below and above that you have the Giza pyramid, and then it goes up to a 72 degrees pyramid. My pyramid, the Arcturian pyramid, piggybacks off of the cubic space-time ratio. So literally, the pyramid that they use is, by angle, what fits into a cube. The pyramid fits, not exactly, and I'll explain that in a second, but the pyramid is using the cubic space-time ratios. They go infinitely in all directions, because you have the space and you have the time, where the cubes are stacked beside each other, above each other, infinitely. It represents time. Ooh. And select any one represents the space. It might be a bit weird to understand, but I don't even understand it fully, but it's time. It's like the blocks represent the time in all directions, and each unit represents the space in all directions. So you've got space and time. And the cube is also very easy to understand, because it's so it's almost, to me, I see the cube as the universal shape for direction, which it is, because it is. So basically, the pyramid that And if you put a pyramid inside a cube, I'll just draw this better because it's getting a bit crusty. Just check that's lined up. If you draw a pyramid, hopefully I can draw it better this time. That's a bit better. Goes there. Oh, I've got the angle so close. If you draw a pyramid in a cube, the angle of the pyramid is 63.435. That's what it comes up as. And don't forget there's other blocks over here, and these lines go on forever as well, and it's all that craziness. I thought that's the angle, bang. But this is what gets really interesting. That angle doesn't work. That's actually the most incorrect angle. And there's a reason for that. And this fascinated me, but also gave me strife for so long, because then I was like, what's the actual angle? And the reason that doesn't work is because it's too perfect. The ratio of a perfect cube deadlocks because everything's equal. All the lines, every line is the same length, which if you want to manipulate the ether and do all that, that's going to cause a huge problem, because you can have perfection within the imperfect shape, but if the fundamental shape that governs everything else, because inside the pyramid the outside reflects the inside, and everything on the inside is geometry has to reflect the outside. If the outside is wrong, then the inside is going to be wrong, and the whole thing's going to be wrong. But basically, I thought without thinking for ages that was the angle. It was simple, and it was that simple. You just put the pyramid in the cube, because that's the one the Arcturians use. They use the cube, and you've got it, bang. But it's wrong. It's completely wrong. It's the most incorrect angle because it's at perfect equilibrium. There's no potential. There's no potential. There's no differential. Both masses are equal. Geometrically speaking, nothing happens. You need imbalance for there to be any motion. I forget which way it runs, this way or this way, but you need imbalance for there to be action. Like, think of the concept of a battery, but in a geometric form. And so I thought, what on earth could the right angle be? Because there's two variables. Yes, I spent a whole year working out what the perfect imperfect angle was, which sounds crazy, but it's true. It has the perfect imperfect angle is perfect. The perfect angle geometrically is frozen. It does nothing. It's like, I mean, I built heaps of these. I mean, they're imperfect to a degree, but the angle's not like a few points off here. It has to be off a certain amount, and we figured it out. But basically, so much sweat and tears went into finding out what that imperfect angle was. And it's not the same, but the term works. It's like the Goldilocks zone they use for planets that are at the correct distance from the sun to inhabit life, or whatever other variables. It's that zone. It's a special secretive zone which allows for all the action to happen, because it's not too far away from the angle, the space-time ratio angle, but it's not too close to the angle, because it's like two lines. Basically, you have, if this is a graph, if up and down represents efficiency, how does this work? up and down represents how efficient it is, here being nothing's happening and here being 100% activity of the pyramid, and you start off and you have a line here which is say if you had 63.43 degrees and you had here like what it was, 63.43, and you had 58 57 degrees or whatever. And I forget how I can draw these if I think, but I'm not thinking now. But basically, the two lines where they converge is the most efficient space. So what you have here is the 57 degrees, which is going along, but I've drawn this incorrectly, I think. It doesn't quite work like that, but basically you've got a convergence point, which nature obviously has elected it. It's not like... There'd be a reason for it, but I've never been able to figure out the reason. I just know what the correct angle is through other means, and that is where you have to have the perfect variable and the imperfect variable and they're both going along, and this one is going to oh that's right, it starts here. This one is going to have no efficiency because it's way off. It's in the zone where it's got nothing to do with that space-time ratio. It's no longer a cube, it's become something else. It's leaning towards a different equilibrium point. And you've got this, which is the perfect cube. Right here, this is the perfection, this is imperfection. The line, say if it starts at 0, it starts ascending and then it starts falling again. That's how it goes. Sorry, I'm getting all confused. I'm going to confuse everyone. Just the graphs confuse me. I've got dyslexic attributes in my brain. So you've got 63.43, which is the perfect angle here. And you've got, say let's start at 57 here. And this line represents efficiency of how the pyramid's working. And yeah, so you got efficiency moving from 0 up to 100%. And you've got the angles starting here from like, 57 degrees going up to 63.43 degrees. And so you've got your line coming in, 0% efficiency, and then as you get closer to the angle, it starts building, becoming warmer and warmer and warmer, and then it hits this equilibrium point where it's at its peak, and then it starts to fall because it's losing its potential, it's losing its differential and becoming deadlocked equilibrium, which is all sides equal, no differential. So you have perfection, which doesn't work because there's no differential, and you have an angle which is too far from that space-time ratio, so the efficiency drops on both sides. The point in between is where you get your most action, and that's the secret angle. Now, it took me ages to figure it out, but the actual angle to be used for this system is exactly within, it can be within a few degrees, but it's between 62.9 degrees and 63.1 degrees, which makes it exactly 63.0 degrees. Is the secret most efficient angle to make the whole system work most efficiently without building countless frames, which is what I did under like crazy stress and frustration and impatience. This angle, 63.0, doesn't matter if it's not going to be perfect, but you're aiming for 63.0 degrees. And that's it. That's the angle. Mark it down well. That's the differential, which is your most active zone between perfection and imperfection, where the peak is at its highest. It can be 63.0 degrees for the Octarian pyramid. And the way I got that was just so many. I had to use my friend, and I had to correlate data, asking different questions where he wouldn't know the answer, but he would tell me in a certain way. I mean, one day he just said the angle. Ages ago in the very beginning, he said, "Is it 63 degrees?" He said that number popped into my head. It sounds all psychic and rubbish like, but it wasn't. As he was driving over, preempted, he said the number 63 popped into his head, and I thought it was just 63.435 because I already knew it was a cube, but it was actually 63. That's it. End of story. 63 degrees. So that was the first data. The second one I asked him was, I said, if the pyramid is 100 units wide, how many units high would it be? And there was heaps of talk, heaps of debate. Not debate, there was heaps of like thinking and seeing of numbers and weird proportions and volumes and stuff. And I can't remember what it was, but it was like, 98.5 or something, or 90, yeah, something like that, 98.5. And so I correlated that, the number he said matched with that. And the third one I did was I got a really big page, like huge, like A0 or something, and I had a 0 point. And this is how this weird stuff works. We had a really long like stick thing, and we had the axis like fused here, and we moved it up and down to where it felt warm. And this was completely square, this paper, so I could get a reference between here and here and here and here to get the angle. And he stopped at the hot spot, and then we did it again and again and again. So that was the third variable. So there's 1, 2, 3. The fourth one was, and this is crazy, I built heaps of little plastic pyramids as accurately as I could. I cut them with patience out of this clear thin plastic, which they're very easy to build and they look really nice because they're very accurate because the plastic's thin, of all different angles with increments of 0.1. So I had a 63.1, 63.2, 63.3. It kept going up and up and up. And it was like this whole spectrum of different angles, ranging from like 58 degrees to 65 degrees. And they were all littered around the lounge room and up the hallway and through the corridor. And it was just this crazy, like they were piled everywhere, but in a line which represented the different angles. And what he did was he closed his eyes, and I got him to think of the question for ages and ages and ages. As soon as he opened them, he just pointed to one, and he pointed, and they weren't labeled. He didn't know which were which, but he pointed exactly to the correct one. He pointed to the 63. So this, and this all just so happened to line up within just a few points. All these four variables all correlated to 63. And so, I mean, I don't rely on just anyone for my information. This person has proven his worth through many certain various experiments and demonstrations. It's just one of those people which I don't think it wasn't a coincidence we met, because his services were very valuable. But anyway, that's all to do with the angle. The angle is 63. So that's the law of imperfection. That angle actually governs everything else in the pyramid. So perfect things in the pyramid can be happy because they're all governed by the imperfect vectors. The vector's a bit off horizontally, it puts everything else off, so it can all work. Because everything gets squashed and scaled accurately, as you'll see. The pyramid also has invisible line systems it uses, whereas the energy is running up the weakest axes, which I'll explain later. But that's an important part as to where the geometry goes in the pyramid and why it goes and where it can't go, and the hot spots and the cold spots. That's all explained later. The pyramid frame is made of copper because, as I explained before, copper is the element of choice. It's cheap, but it's actually probably the best material you can use for a frame anyway. The ether likes it and recognizes it as a positive metal, but only in conjunction with silver or aluminium. Otherwise it has a different value. The pyramid is to be made of copper that's clean and polished. There's more information about the frame, which I'm not going to explain at the moment because it gets really detailed, but it has to be a certain weight, a certain thickness. It has to match up with other proportions. Everything, its atomic weight has a value. It's not significant, it's not highly significant, but it is. And the thickness of it can't be too thin, it can't be too thick. Otherwise it can just make the system more inefficient. But it's not a huge, issue, but I'm very particular about these things. The other thing for this system, the Arcturian pyramid, there's also an optimum diameter for the base of the pyramid, which is between here and here. And the range we came to for the base, minus the variable of the vacuum chamber, because that is a variable that has resistance, but say without that, what we know for sure is that the optimum diameter is between, it ranges from, for the average person, it ranges from about 260 to 330 millimeters across. Basically, that's between the squares on the bottom, the easiest way to measure, just one of the sides on the bottom. 260 to 330 millimeters diameter, and the reason for that is because if the machine's too small, it's too hard to build, and it all sort of like it's too tight. If it's too big, your energy cannot feed it enough. You can't start it up as easily. You could start it, but if it was really big, it would be pretty hard to kickstart the thing, I think, unless you're in a really hot zone in the planet, but then it would start running off the planetary energy and your aura wouldn't be able to oscillate it because it would be too weak. It would start oscillating off the natural forces. But if you want to use it as a telepathic machine, in between this range, 260, 330 millimeters is a copper, the diameter of the copper, one of the lengths of the copper base, minus the case, not including, because the case makes it bigger, not including that. It's measured by the copper, not the silica case. That's the basics of the frame. There is more to it, like the capstone, but that's explained later. But this is more about why pyramid manipulates energy, the differentials the basics, the really important stuff, that angle being the most important data of the whole thing. That unlocks the key. Without that, nothing happens. It's now time to talk about the concave silver reflectors, which this is not the silver reflector because I'm not going to pull it out of the pyramid, but this is its shape, and it's positive. Its actual shape and its concaveness here, as you can see. See, it falls apart. I don't need it anymore. Anyway, so I've had the silver one cast out of that and polished up. The whole thing cost a fortune, an absolute fortune. Okay, so basically what the reflectors do in the machine is quite simple, actually. They do two things. And the first one is, as far as I know, they do two things. Daniela's, they do slightly different things, but for this pyramid, the first thing is it traps energy. Doesn't attract it, it traps it. It stops it from escaping. Like, they're like plugs. It's like a plug in a bathtub. It stops the water from escaping, because if you view the ether as water going into a tank, and you've got a hole in the tank, it's like an inverted tank. It's like an invisible tank, but it's there. The reflectors create like a tank sort of. They allow the pressure to be. They keep the pressure trapped in, and it's weird how it works, because unlike a transverse wave, the wave of the ether, the energy pressure is all connected like elastic. That's why the reflectors can have gaps between them, but the energy still trapped because it's elastic. It can't disperse like water or an electromagnetic wave. It's all one. So if you've got two or three reflectors at equal phases from each other, then you have trapped. Then you can trap successfully the ether in the machine, and that's what they do. If you don't trap the energy, it's gonna radiate outwards, which it does anyway. So say if you've got potential in the middle, it's going to radiate out anyway, and the reflectors are going to send it straight back to the center of the machine. Just might change my pen. They're going to send it straight back to the center, and what goes out here doesn't. And what goes out here is the radiation, but the actual pressure field is trapped, because, as I said, none of this would work properly if it was a transverse. It wouldn't work the way this system works if this was a transverse wave or even a longitudinal wave, but because it's an elastic longitudinal wave, which might sound crazy, but it's not if you really think about it, because the ether can be elastic, it can be like a stream, it can be one. The pressure does become trapped with just reflectors and gaps in the middle, provided you fulfill the phase requirements. And what's not is radiated out, but the actual pressure is different. It's a different system. Multiple systems run at once. But without getting too technical, because it does get quite technical, the reflectors 1 traps energy, but they fulfill another function because these designs are very efficient. They're sort of cunning how efficient they are. The second one is it reflects it, and you might think these two are the same, traps and reflects. It's not, because these can be flat, you see, and they'll still trap the energy, and that's because of the elastic properties of the wave. They can still be flat, as in Daniela's pyramid, the discs can be flat, and it's still going to do the same thing. It's going to trap it, and it's going to reflect it to a degree, but it's actually more going to trap it, and the potential is just going to get stronger and stronger in the middle, rather than reflecting it. The second function of what it does is reflects it back, which we've just been drawing. And you can adjust that angle to anything you want, depending on where you want to reflect it. Not for the design. The design is set on a certain distance for a certain reason, but say if you were, but the law states basically it can be different angles and the energy will still be trapped and it'll be reflected at whatever angle you set. But there are ranges where it's not going to work, like if it's convex, it's just going to fall off. Optimally, if you just want to trap it, should be just a little bit concave. But the design that the Arcturian design has a specific concave angle that it's reflected back to, and that's the quartz crystal. And it's the same opposite with the mercury disc. It works like sort of like a laser principle, concave laser cavity setup, parallel laser, concave laser cavity, similar to that. So yes, two things. So they're made of silver. It's the metal of choice. It's dense, as in the wave will try and escape through the metal. Some of it will get through anyway, but just little bits, not much. So you needed a certain thickness, which is all. I might explain it, I'm not sure. It's getting pretty technical because I've got all the thicknesses, but I think for the 330mm base design, it's about 8 mils or 7 mils. It's pretty thick. About 2 kilograms of silver in the disc in the pyramid. But most of the energy will be trapped and reflected back depending on the angle that the disc's set at and the fact that it's a solid piece of silver, where the energy, because it's different energy, it doesn't work like electromagnetism. Some of it does leak through because the ether energy can penetrate through anything, but certain grades of ether some of it will get through, but certain grades will be blocked by it and forced inwards, and whatever the wave transmutes to, or is, say if it's translated down into a lower frequency or an electromagnetic spectrum, all the laws still abide by the same principle of reflection. It's a reflection of reflection. It's still going to abide by the same laws regardless. So you can use the laws of optics to govern how to set up your reflectors, but the ether laws involve the thickness of the disc and just the principle that it will trap the energy even if it's flat. It does not have to be concave, technically speaking, which Daniela's prototype proved that. The configuration, which I'll draw, of the discs in this pyramid are as follows. And this is not going to be the scale, but it's going to be roughly proportionate. The way I explain it, if you draw it up in CAD, you'd get the correct measurements, because everything is placed using fundamental laws. And basically, say if you've got a base that's a 330 or whatever, And you've got the height at 63 degrees, wherever that might be. It's probably about here. No, that's too high. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. What matters is you start off with the lower reflector, which the lower reflector of the pyramid is exactly, and it can be perfect. There's no need to fear about imperfection because the whole system has been modified to be imperfect. Only for the space-time ratio. The lower reflector is exactly half the diameter of the base. So if it was 330 across, the reflector would be 165 millimeters in diameter, roughly. Let's say between 5 and 8 mil thick. Which is another reason for the thickness as well. It's the way the ether recognizes the reflector as mass in opposition to the frame. So there's multiple reasons it has to be thick. But basically, so the way you set up your reflector is, it's half the diameter of the base, but it has to follow these in vector lines, which is half an octave of the pyramid. So this is a side view of the pyramid, meaning like a cross section of the center. So you've got your harmonic center, which is roughly here, and the top reflector follows the same law. The capstone on the pyramid comes down to exactly a quarter of its height, and that's just the way that the aliens have set it up. So Arcturians or whatever they're called. But look at this. This is exactly half the diameter as well. So the reflector inside the capstone is just as this, half the diameter. So you've got your frame copper. It's based by the outside of the copper, half the diameter. You've got your lower reflector, you've got your capstone, which comes down to 1/4 of the height of the whole system, measured this way or this way, it doesn't make any difference. And the diameter of your Mercury disk, that's why it's shaped like that, as I showed you when I had the old blank out. That's why it's shaped like that, it's concaved on both sides. And then you're like, how does the crystal fit into this? And this is the marvelousness of it. It's all automatic and simple once you understand it. You just connect the lines between here and here. And this position, say if there's 12 levels on the pyramid, 0 to 12, going all the way up. The base being 0, the very tip being 12. Oops. Just check this is right. This level is about 7.2. This is where the crystal sits. And it also governs the exact concave of these reflectors. And it's so simple to do. This is how crazily simple it is. Because this whole system is simple. It's just disguised as being something. Because you can't see the invisible structure of what's going on in the machine. Gosh. Like, it's hidden, but it's visible. Once you understand it, it's really simple. A sphere here and a sphere here. And you have the... goodness me. It goes more like that, does it? That's not quite... You get the point. These, and it also adjusts the... that's why that reflector... I'll just get bigger. that's why this odd looking reflector has the exact shape that it does, because it follows all the invisible lines. See how it's got a slight curve going up here? That's because it's following this invisible line going up to the top, and the concave here is where this crystal is positioned, which is here, wherever, however you can see it. It's a certain height from here, but it's focused on this, and it's the same with this one. In CAD you just draw spheres and you connect the arc to get the exact concave. It's really basic, super basic physics. That part of it is super basic to set it up. And if you measure this, like, look, if I measure that, because my base is 330, it comes to 165, as I said, which is half the diameter. I don't know if that can be seen. If I put it down here. 165, yeah, which is half the diameter of the base. Mess everywhere. Put that over there. Yes, because that's how it works. It's simple. It's like octaves. It's like the whole thing's like a geometric piece of. It's like a geometric instrument, and that's what I mean. It uses simple universal laws, and that's how we figured out why the parts were at a certain height. Because once I understood all this, it was like cracking the code of how it all worked, and it was really simple. So that's your reflectors, basically. There is also, and this is the other part which is nice and simple, the symbol, which I'm not getting to yet, but the center of the symbol is not housed at the center of the pyramid. There's two reasons for that, and the first one being you can't put anything. I should have explained this earlier on, but I forget. There's just so much to explain. If that's the center of that sphere. The symbol sits at the center of this sphere, the center of the symbol, but the actual center of the pyramid is slightly above it. It's not in the same spot. There's multiple reasons for that. That's because if you have it at the very center, then you don't have room for anything else, because it's covering the center, and it's going to put everything else out. And but the sphere, there's a sphere that fits perfectly in here. This reflector is not concave to this sphere, it's concave to this. And that's what I was saying, it doesn't have to be concave to that sphere, because there are other systems which keep the energy in. It doesn't need to be reflecting at the center, it just needs, because it's blocking it anyway. It's like a beam, it's like a laser beam running through that crystal like this. Like if I draw messes, and it's like a beam, the rays, or it turns from pressure into rays. And they're all passing through that crystal, focused straight through the middle of it. It's magnetized. So, basically, yeah, the symbol sits in the very center of that sphere, which meets the lines of the pyramid. But the harmonic center of the whole unit, this is where it gets all complicated because there's lines going everywhere. It gets a bit confusing. The harmonic center of the pyramid, which also runs through that. You have to have an off-centeredness, which I'll explain later, because that's where the tube goes. And the tube off-centeredness is lined with this centeredness. It gets complicated, I know, but it's hard for me to explain, and it just is, but I'll explain it at a later point. But You have to follow the invisible lines everywhere. Anyway, so you've got your lower reflector, you've got your mercury and salt reflector, which is a piezoelectric device, and you have your reflectors on the side here, and the ones on the machine are actually too small because I didn't figure out their diameter, because I didn't use that natural law that I was only just discovering when I had them made. But the diameter of these follows the same law as this, but on the side of the pyramid. So the actual, and I'm not sure if it works the same for this diameter, but if you say had the side of the pyramid, which is going to look steeper, just one of the faces, not the side, the face of the pyramid, which is going to appear steeper, and magnets, and you move up to this height here, the center of the reflectors, and you apply that to the side, one of the faces of the pyramid, and you use that same law here where there's half the diameter of the base. You just follow that scale up to here and you get the diameter of the reflectors on the side of the pyramid. And it's that simple. It's the same law as this, but for the side of the face. And their concave value is this sphere here. And these reflectors, they may not actually be required for the whole system to start, but certainly for the first pyramid you'll need them, because they're going to ensure that any energy in this bubble, because there's also reflectors on the rings, isn't going to escape. So you need them. And they're also made of silver, which is going to really jack up the price. 4 little polished silver reflectors, but basically that's the way it needs to be. And that's the system of how, that's on a basic level, how the whole reflector system in the machine works. You've got these two, really simply, which focused on the crystal, based on all of these master governors. You've got these two here for support, to keep the energy in, and the rings, which I'll explain later, which is a separate system. It's a sphere, drawn it wrong, within this sphere.